Keith Smith, Celtics blog, Real GM, joins us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Sixers lose to the Boston Celtics, and the Celtics are moving on. We'll dive into the series and much, much more with Keith Smith here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. What's going on, Keith?
Not so much. I'm not sure how I can match sweaty socks, but I'll do my best.
Well, would you agree that Robert Covington was not very good last night?
Yeah, it was a tough series for him. I didn't expect him to struggle on the defensive end quite as much as he did offensively. Boston they stuck with him and got right into his body, and he's not a good ball handler or creator, and that just took him completely out of the series. And it was a rough game, other than the one game where he stepped up and had a bunch of points. He was pretty moderately awful in all the remainder of the games.
What do you think, but all these games were close. They lost the games by a total of 10 points or something like that, or game 2, 3, and 5 by a total of 10 points. So obviously these games were a couple of possessions. In the end, what's the difference between these two?
I think it's execution. I think Philadelphia's old problem from early in the season cropped back up of poor execution at the end of the half. We saw that last night. Celtics went on, I believe it was a 9-0 run to close out the first half and finish with the lead. And then at the end of the game, they struggled to get the ball into the right spot. And then defensively, way too many defensive breakdowns late in the game to pull off a win.
Yeah, a lot of turnovers, a lot of bad possessions. What was the turning point of last night's game? Was there a play, a moment, or something that you really thought that game changed last night?
I think it was very late in the game. There was a play where the Celtics got a turnover, and then they found Jason Tatum had I believe it was J.J. Redick, pinned underneath the basket, and he got fouled. And that seemed to be the moment where the Celtics said, all right, we now are back where we need to be. Let's resettle back down and let's get this thing done. And then from there, they just it was all the way up to that last possession, but they kind of salted it away from there, if you will.
Keith, what did you think the impact that they had from Jaylen Brown starting and coming back? He was big last night.
Yeah, it was big. It left no holes in the starting lineup. Everybody had to be guarded, and what the Sixers had done in Game 4 was they had finally gone to, we're just going to ignore Marcus Smart. We're going to play off him by a mile, not even treat him like he's in the gym on the offensive end, and that worked great for them. When you put Jaylen Brown back in there was no holes. And what it also did was that forced J.J. Redick was going to have to cover either Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum because they weren't going to put him on Terry Rozier. And then that was the matchup. You saw the Celtics. They went to it over and over and over again against Redick. And then when Bellinelli came in, more of the same. It created no whole offense for Boston and makes them very difficult to guard.
Was Aaron Baines a surprise to you in this series, especially from beyond the arc?
Yeah, definitely. He hit more threes in this series than he hit all year. I think there's some stats floating around that he made more threes in the series than a handful of Sixers guys combined, which is just, crazy to think of. But that's big guys have to do that now. And he has been kind of, I don't want to say clamoring because he's not that kind of guy, but he's basically been saying, hey, I can make these jump shots if you put me in the position to get them and to make them. And he did that throughout the series, and obviously he was wonderful on defense, really made Joel Embiid work for everything he got against him. It was a huge series for Aaron Baines where he really showed his value to the Celtics.
You've talked with us before about the Celtics guard rotation. Was Shane Larkin's injury actually a benefit to them, or would you think Jaylen Brown would have started anyway?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't think he would have. I think they would have stuck with Smart in the starting five. Moving Brown into the starting five was as much about needing a ball handler in the second unit as it was anything else. Without Larkin, it was really just Rozier and Smart. They're the only two main ball handlers that Boston has available. So that was the change that they really were forced to make. Otherwise, you were going to run into sections of the games, which they've had this year as they've battled injuries, where the main ball handler on the floor is Al Horford, and that's not really anything they wanted to be going up against Philadelphia in the playoffs. So that's what that change was. So it might have benefited them a little bit. I think for one game you can get away with that. I think long term, though, that's something that definitely hurts the Celtics.
So think of Embiid tonight. I mean, it seemed that was a little gassed late in the game, and then they go to him, and he's still having some issues closing down in the post. He seems like he's much more comfortable out of the post and a little bit, taking that jumper.
Yeah, he definitely wants to turn and face on guys, and if he can't put it on the floor for one or two bounces and get right to the rim, then he wants to shoot the jump shot, and that's the Celtics were willing to live that. If you want to shoot a bunch of mid-range jump shots, for a guy who is as remarkable as he is as a talent, that's still an inefficient shot even for him. Boston's willing to live with that, and he took it all throughout the entire series and a bunch of times last night. And then I think the one play where he really did go on Baines, and he probably did get fouled on that play, but he didn't have any lift and explosion to finish up and over him. And at that point, that's what you're looking for. I think he was just completely gassed by the time that game ended. He didn't have anything left.
Game 4, Keith Smith's with us, Celtics blog, Real GM here on the Sports Bash Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Game 4, T.J. McConnell was entered and a difference maker. What was Boston able to do to him last night to kind of take away that element of the Sixers game?
Yeah, I think I hesitate to say they got caught off guard, but I think that's what really happened in Game 4. I think they were caught off guard by his aggressiveness. So what you did see in Game 5 was Terry Rozier stayed really glued to T.J. McConnell. He didn't give him any space to work. When McConnell did get shots, he had to work for them, and he made things happen, but it wasn't as easy as it was in Game 4. And I think it was just by paying him that much more attention and getting up on him, it made life difficult on him.
Yeah, and then there's Ben Simmons, who, was more aggressive, had definitely a better series as it went on, but was certainly not the same player that any of us saw during the regular season, right? I mean, what was Boston? Was it what Boston was able to do to him, or was it something in his game?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think for the majority of it was that it is how Boston played him. They played Al Horford on him almost exclusively. Marcus Morris checked him for a handful of minutes each game, but it was really Al Horford's job to defend Ben Simmons, and he played him just like he did in the regular season, played off him. And now when other teams have done that to Simmons, they're generally not defending him with another guy who's 6'10", 250, waiting for him at the rim. They're playing off him with a guy who is 6'5", and then Simmons just says, well, forget it, I'll still just drive and finish over you even though you're off me. He tried that against Horford, and then Horford's standing right there. A few times he got by Horford, he ran into Baines or Morris or even Tatum in his length. They were able to really get him uncomfortable. And then the other little bit was, and you mentioned it, he got better as the series went along. Early on, he was just very passive. He wasn't the aggressive player. And I thought Brett Brown made a nice change last night where what he did with Simmons was the minute he gave up the ball, he made a hard basket cut. They got a bunch of good looks off of that. Challenge was he missed 4 or 5 of them, too, and those are shots that he really has to be able to finish.
Keith, you tweeted out at one point last night that all of Boston's Embiid Simmons defenders have 4 fouls. That was Horford, Baines, and Morris at that point. And yet they never fouled any of those guys out of the game. Did they get away from what was working?
That was seemingly the whole series, that guys had 3 and 4 fouls in the Sixers. They just don't have that personnel to go after you like that, right?
Yeah, what was weird was you would think that's a point where that's when you want to start dumping it into Embiid in the post and just let him work through guys and get guys fouled out of the game. In the minute, every game, you mentioned it, and especially last night it stood out, when those guys all got to 4 fouls, that's when Embiid started taking jumpers. He actually came off the floor for a series of minutes during that stretch. And the fact that they didn't take advantage of that, it's something you have to think through. And I don't think that came from the sideline, because I think they were running sets. In Boston, to their credit, even though they had the fouls, they didn't let up. They still stayed aggressive. They were banging guys on cuts, banging guys in the post. And if it wasn't there right away for Philly, then they settled, and that's when they turned to that mid-range jump shooting team, and that's just not – you're not going to win games that way.
Where do you fall, Keith, on the coaching debate? Because there are a lot of people out here that will remember what the end of Game 3 and the timeout play that was called for Boston and how good Stevens has been, and they like to point the finger at Brett Brown, but he can't walk out on the floor and make shots.
No, 100%. Coaches either get far too much credit or not enough. And in this case, I don't think Brett Brown – I think people have short memories. It's a lot of what have you done for me lately. They won 52 games and went into the second round of the playoffs. No one could have ever expected that before this season. Most people had them in the mix for a playoff spot. The third seed overall, they had a great season. And as much as it is a learning experience for the players, it's a learning experience for Brett Brown. This is the first time he's been the head guy on the sideline for the playoffs, and he had to learn as he went too. And I think he's getting now beat up far too much than he really should be. I think he did a remarkable job. And I can tell you right now, if Philadelphia says, this isn't the guy now, he didn't win in the playoffs, we're going to let him go, you're going to have at least probably another 5 or 6 teams that are going to jump all over him and hire him for their job.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big storyline from a lot of people here that thought that Brad, if you flip-flop the coaches, many people thought the Sixers would win with Brad Stevens coaching if Brown was coaching the Celtics. That's how much of a disparity they thought there was in the coaching in the series.
Yeah, and that may be true. And to that, I would counter Brad Stevens has had a couple runs through the playoffs now. This was his 4th year in a postseason setting, so he kind of knows the rhythm, the feel, and what you got to do throughout games. And the big thing Brad Stevens does is at no point does he overreact. He really lets his team just kind of go. That's probably what Brown will walk away, if I guess, from last night, is he had burned almost all of his timeouts so early in the game. They had only one timeout with, I want to say it was 7 or 8 minutes left in the game. Then he had to use that one with about 2 or 3 minutes left. Then they have a timeout to set up that final play. And that's, but again, it's a learning experience for him. Stevens has had those reps in the playoffs now for 3 straight years. And now you're seeing it all really come together for him.
Keith Smith, Celtics blog, Real GM, here on the Sports Bash Boardwalk Honda Hotline. The Celtics win in 5. They're playing Cleveland. The Sixers are heading home. Keith, appreciate the time as always.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.